wheel's pound of power with the speed you need to win. Roaring. Spinning. Winning. It's the coolest. Adjustable seat. You ride low and neat. Look at that big wheel. It turns on a dime. Roaring. Spinning. Winning. This Christmas, it's the big wheel by Marks.
As long as thanks is possible, then joy is always possible. Joy is always possible. Whenever, meaning now, wherever, meaning here. The holy grail of joy is not in some exotic location or some emotional mountain peak experience. The joy wonder could be here. Here in the messy, piercing ache of now. Joy might be unbelievably possible. No amount of regret changes the past. No amount of anxiety changes the future. Any amount of grateful joy changes the present.
Wow. The gift I didn't get. Profiting from the word. Next on So What?
Hi, I'm Don Waite.
And I'm Chris Dorman.
And welcome back to So What? Joy to the world. Merry Christmas to you guys and to you, Chris.
Thank you.
We've been talking a lot about joy by God's providence. It just happened that we got onto that chapter of Pink's book, Profiting from the Word, Joy. And we've been talking about it for about, a month now?
Yeah.
And we're not done because there's still things that get in the way of us having joy.
That's right,
Chris.
That's right.
There is.
That's right. As providence would have it, the Lord directed me to go back through the first 5 books of the Old Testament again, the Pentateuch. I hadn't done that in a while, and it's interesting that he asked me to do that now as we're looking at joy, because something that struck me, that has struck me many times in the past, but it hit me in a different way this time, and that is the ingratitude of the Jewish people. Especially when you read the Exodus and you read as they are rescued, as they're pulled out of slavery and terrible, horrible treatment. They're freed. They're freed. And in a matter of seconds, really, they're complaining. And they want to go back to Egypt. As terrible and awful as it was, it's what they knew, and that's what they wanted to return to. They could ignore the blessings of God, the mighty acts of God, His rescue, His redemption of them. No. They wanted what they knew, the terrible, horrible things. And they complained about what they didn't have instead of rejoicing in what God had done. Instead of rejoicing in their freedom, they just feared the morrow. They feared tomorrow, what might happen, what could happen. It didn't matter that God was physically in their midst, literally. They had a physical manifestation of the presence of God in their midst,
right.
And it wasn't enough.
It wasn't enough. And lest we say, but if I was there and would have seen that, I would have believed, I would have had a grateful heart. I think what that is telling us, what that narrative is telling us, is what our hearts can do.
Yeah.
That right in the midst of the manifest presence and glory of God, I can be ungrateful.
That's right.
We have an object lesson right here.
Yep.
What is that? A glass of water.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of glass of water? Is it half full?
Or half empty. Which is it?
Right?
It's both.
It's both.
It's both, but how you see it matters. What we're talking about today is the importance of gratitude in the fight for joy. Beloved, the Jews were so blessed by God. There was an overabundance of miraculous activity in their lives.
Yes.
And the truth is, they weren't grateful for it. They weren't. They didn't have gratitude for it, and therefore they doubted it. They doubted it. And because they doubted it, they didn't have joy. They couldn't rejoice in God. They couldn't celebrate the miraculous things they were witnessing. They couldn't, because their hearts were ungrateful.
Right.
How about you? How about me?
Because the reality, Chris, I'm going to come back to this. Okay, this right here. Is this about being a half full or a half empty glass? No, it's about the providence of God providing water for me that my body needs.
That's
in
right.
His goodness and grace,
That's right.
He has provided water for me
That's right.
to ingest, to keep me alive for His glory, and His grace is just so profound when I think of something simple,
Right.
like water.
God's goodness is so plentiful, A.W. Pink said in his book on the attributes of God. God's goodness is so plentiful that we ignore it, that we take it for granted. Beloved, ask yourself, when was the last time, seriously, when was the last time you thought about your taste buds? And you thought about what a joy it is to taste chocolate or a kiwi, or cherries in season. When was the last time you celebrated the deliciousness of food? When was the last time you saw a carnation and it took in that aroma and realized that's a sign of the goodness of God? He could have given us flowers. All flowers could have been covered with thorns. All flowers could have been ugly, colorless. Food that he'd given us, he could have given us just some paste to eat out of a tube. We need sustenance to survive. These machines won't survive without fuel. He could have given us fuel that was tasteless, or worse yet, was awful, that smelled terrible, that made us nauseous.
It was an unpleasant experience.
Unpleasant experience. He could have made procreation something painful and difficult and ugly and awful, something that we dread and hate. He could have done that. He could have. He really, really could have done that, but he didn't. Why? Because he loves us. He loves us, and his signs of his goodness are all around us if we want to see them. Do you have people in your life that no matter what it is, no matter how good it is, no matter how wondrous it is, there's always something bad? There's always something wrong with it? Do you have people in your life like Debbie Downers? There's always something wrong in the best of circumstances. Always. They can't rejoice in the now. They can't celebrate the now. They can't do it. And because of it, they don't have joy.
Right. What about the big wheel? The big wheel.
So I grew up, I realized that my experience as a child is very different from many of yours, okay? I know that. And I don't take that lightly, okay? I had a very typical American kid growing up. Mom and dad, nuclear family, older brother and sister, had a house, all that kind of stuff. We weren't wealthy, but I never starved, okay? I had great Christmases and great birthdays, wonderful gifts, wonderful things. I never went without. But the thing that stands out to me, here at me as a 56-year-old man, is the one gift I didn't get. I wanted a big wheel. Okay, when I was 4 or 5 years old, I remember seeing a commercial of big wheels, and I remember some friends at school had big wheels, and I wanted a big wheel, and I told my parents I really want a big wheel, and I never got one. I didn't. I asked for 2 or 3 Christmases and birthdays, and I finally gave up. And of all the things and all the gifts of all the birthday and Christmas celebrations, what stands out to me now is that one gift I didn't get, which tells me I wasn't grateful for all the gifts that I did get. I didn't pause and thank and really, really treasure the generosity and kindness of my parents. I took it for granted.
Yep.
Do you, beloved, take the goodness of God for granted and latch on to what you don't have instead of rejoicing in what you do have?
The blessings become so commonplace, to your point, that we become ungrateful.
Yeah.
You know, the Jews were in the wilderness. They didn't have water. God provided water out of a rock, no less. And they were satisfied for a time, and then it wasn't enough. But we want something more.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to give you manna.
Yep. And they rejoiced when they got the manna. And then later, they complained that all we have is this manna.
We want quail.
He gives it to them.
I'm going to give you quail.
Yep.
And you know, that would be enough, right? So they had water, they had quail, they had manna, they stopped complaining, right? No.
Nope.
But I think your big wheel story really resonated with me, because what it reminded me of is we are them. I am them. It's a part of who we are. It's so easy to slide into the ungrateful place. Yeah. When I look at this glass of water, I got to be honest. I sometimes see it as half empty. I sometimes see it as, it's not good enough, God. You providing my general needs is not good enough. I need you to do X for me for life to be okay.
Right.
And I become a complainer.
And so we're not talking about having a positive attitude.
No.
We're not talking about the power of positive thinking.
Right.
That's not it at all. We're talking about an honest look at life as God gives it. Life as God gives it is hard. It is, and it's supposed to be. Because this isn't heaven. This world is fallen and broken, and it's supposed to be difficult, and Jesus assured us that it would be. That's an evidence of God's faithfulness, that life here is difficult and painful. There is loss, there is mourning, there is sadness. But God's evidence of God's goodness, though, beloved, is still evident. It is still everywhere around you if you will take the time to stop and notice it, to acknowledge it. You can choose to ignore it. You can choose to be ungrateful for the many blessings you receive every single day. And if you do, you will never have joy. You will never have joy. How could Paul rejoice in prison? Arms and feet shackled, facing an uncertain future, knowing an executioner's sword's going to chop off his head at any second. And he just says, rejoice. Right then, right now, in that prison, back bleeding, chained like an animal, celebrate, rejoice. Ow. Rejoice!
Because it all pales in comparison to the glory that will be revealed, is what he said.
That's right. We're not making light of the difficulties in your life. We're not.
No.
We're not, and God isn't either. But he wants you to think of something else. He wants you to put your eyes on heaven. He wants you to be thinking about eternity. The things we suffer and struggle with here are temporary. They're temporary. They're not going to last. They're not. God's goodness will endure for all eternity, and you will be with him forever if you are in Christ. And if you are in Christ, as that opening quote says, you can have joy right now, regardless of your circumstances, not by a Pollyanna false view of your reality, by recognizing that your suffering, whatever it may be, is temporary, that Jesus has secured for you eternal bliss. You are forgiven, which you could never ever earn, which you don't deserve, a gift you didn't even know that you really needed more than anything else. He's given it to you. And you have, as Peter said, everything you need for life and godliness. You do, through him.
You have every spiritual blessing in the heavenly realms. You have more than a big wheel, right? We have everything we need. Why? Because Jesus, for the joy set before him, endured the cross. If Jesus can endure the cross and bear the wrath of his Father, and his face turned away from the Son, if Jesus can endure that for my sake, then as bad as my life is, as bad as things can get, and they can get horribly bad, we get it, they can get horribly bad, you can still have joy. I can still have joy.
That's right.
Why? Because of the cross.
That's right.
Because of the cross. Because ultimately, it's not rooted in this life. It's rooted in something greater, and something that's awaiting us.
Exactly. So friends, don't bemoan the gift you didn't get. You don't. Because you've been blessed with everything you need. Whether you realize that or not, honestly, is entirely up to you. I pray you would see it. I pray you would see the abundance of his goodness and his grace every day so that you may have joy. Thank you for tuning in, my friends, and I'll talk to you next week.
We'll see you soon.